My family and I were on this big road trip. I was kind of obsessed with bucket lists at the time because I was like in a very fragile situation. I had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when I was 35, and then since then, everything just felt very tick, tick, tick. Like I needed to make everything count. And it seemed like a trip to the Grand Canyon would be just the thing. So we're driving along and I see this tiny little chapel, like not a small church, like a tiny little chapel. And I am completely obsessed with like the world's largest things, but also like the world's smallest things. So have I seen the largest Paul Bunyan? Yes. Have I seen the smallest Paul Bunyan? Yes, I have. So I pulled over and went inside, and the church was like a loose gravel floor and wood, kind of slatted sides. And at first I was shocked when I realized that the entire thing was covered in graffiti, like just rafters to floor and even the altar at the front. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't graffiti. It was people's prayers. It was like the true horrible things that people might be too scared to say out loud, like written in pieces of paper stuffed in the wood, or just like carved in. Stuff like, please let my daughter be the way she was before. Or, God, can you hear me? Or, heal me. Or, none of this is fair. And the whole thing took my breath away. Sometimes church or just culture makes you feel like you need to be extra polite. And there's nothing polite about our tragedies, about the things that take our lives apart. So it gave me this overwhelming sense of awe that there could be places where we say, these are the things that come undone. These are the things for which there are no cure. And you can have that feeling of like screaming into the void, and that your honesty is good and kind of lovable. One of the only totally necessary things about having a hard life is having people to just talk about it with, people who really understand. And so I have this podcast called Everything Happens, period, instead of Everything Happens for a Reason. And I've just made really amazing friends through the podcast, through having these kind of uncomfortably honest, medium sad, usually kind of funny, not confessionals, just like punchy explorations. And so I met this amazing person through the podcast. Her name's Lanecia Rouse Tinsley, and she is also a Duke Divinity School graduate, which is the place where I work. And she's this multidisciplinary artist. And she gets grief and how grief comes right up alongside our love and shows us like why all this matters in the first place.
My name is Lanecia Rouse Tinsley, and I am a visual artist. In 2013, Cleve and I learned that we were pregnant with a child, and we gave her a name as soon as we found out that it was going to be a girl. And her name is Lanecia Tinsley, AJ is for short. And wow, we found out about her in August of 2013, and then around November, Thanksgiving time, I started experiencing some complications. And then as we were entering into Advent, on December 3rd, I went into the hospital because I have what they call in the medical field, at that time they called it incompetent cervix. I've read that the language has changed, or there's been a lot of conversations about changing it because that just does not work. But basically my body was not strong enough in that moment to hold her. And so went into labor, and it was bananas. I was literally like, no, like I was literally just talking to my sister yesterday about a baby shower, you know, that kind of shock to the system. But we kept her in as long as we possibly could. And then on December 4th, AJ came into this world, and she lived for over 2.5 hours. And Cleve got to experience her wiggling body, that I experienced within. And she was no longer just a figment of his imagination, but very real. And so I feel fortunate that he was able to receive that gift. And then she died resting on my chest. And it was then that I realized, like, whoa, I'm going to be living with the pain of her absence forever. And I need to find a way to live these days in a way that honors the mother that I wanted to be for her, and then also kind of honored the giftings and the stirrings and desires of my own heart. And so in 2014, I left full-time ministry to become a full-time artist in downtown Houston. Yeah, whenever I am in the studio, I want to be as honest and authentic as I possibly can. I remember one of my first big commissions was for a church that wanted me to paint these huge 6 feet by 6 feet liturgical paintings, abstract, and they just sat in my studio for about a month before I even put anything on them. And I went to the art store, and the manager was like, "How are those big paintings going?" And I was just like, "Oh, they're the masterpieces of minimalism," and we just laughed. And he said, "When you go back into your studio tonight, just put all of your energy, paint big." He was like, literally, like, just paint big, and remember that the canvas is big enough and strong enough to hold all of your energy and all of your truth, And that stayed with me, and it really motivated me to go back to this canvas. And through all of that, I just realized that I am a hopeful person. And every time I go into my studio and I work, that I am approaching the table and the blank canvas with an element of hope that, what is will not be once I'm all done, and that it will become, and it's a slow becoming. And sometimes it's quick and it's fast, but as long as I show up fully and I'm as honest as I possibly can, the blank canvas won't stay blank forever.
I hear from people all the time about the lives they can't fix, about their befores and afters. And it made me really want a place for all of us, like in the chapel, to be able to put those true, lovely, honest stories. That's why I immediately thought we should do something. We should do something a little more concrete. And I immediately thought about Lanecia. She makes these really incredible pieces that are often, please excuse the fact that I am not an artist and you're about to hear me describe things that are not my specialty. She has this incredible way of layering images with so much texture and life. And so we thought, what if she took some of these pieces of paper where people had written their honest thing? What if they answered a question like, "In my life, there is no cure for," and then we did something with them? So we asked Lanecia, and she was immediately like, "Yes, absolutely, I can figure something out."
When I saw those prompts on your website, I felt like I was with my people in so many ways. The courage that people had to show up in that space and to share their truths, along with their names, on the site. I felt so honored, to be invited into their life experience. And it was a really sacred space for me. As I was creating the work for our collaboration, it was part of my morning ritual alongside of reading poetry, was just to sit with those words. And a lot of the stories are not like I haven't experienced. However, as I worked, there was like this common kind of thread. My sister always says, she's a poet, and she says, she teaches, the more personal your work is, the more universal. And I felt that lived out as I was reading these very personal stories, but it's like, oh, there's still this like true feeling of empathy in many ways that surprised me. Even though I haven't lived that experience, I still could connect to to the pain of that, to the grief of that. So Reliquary, Complicated Truths is composed of discarded wood pallet that I picked up from construction workers working on a new dwelling place, and it was perfect because I wanted to compose a wall. And this was a commission that was really a collaborative piece. And so in our conversations with, especially the conversations I had with the Everything Happens project, we talked a lot about building something where people could add to the piece, and that it would be a living kind of installation piece, and that would grow in its texture and life in time. And so the piece is built out of paper. And paper is a fragile material unless you coat it. So some papers are stronger than others if you use a coat to make it stronger. But I knew I wanted to use paper that was fragile and then figure out different ways of kind of messing with the consistency of it. So there's a poem called Separation by W.S. Merwin, and it was an important poem to me during my grief process, and it talks about the memory of someone loved being like this thread that runs through everything that the voice was saying they did. And so I love to stitch thread into things and just this memory. But then also, this piece was about our communal fragility and the importance of like community. And I see community in many ways visually as like the stitching thread that can hold us together sometimes when we're really falling apart. Or even when we're strong, it's just like this thing that knits us together, this imagery of knitting and sewing. And so I wanted to work a thread into the layers of places where I took a hammer at one point and just like went into the wall to create these holes that people could drop their cards into, and did some stitching. And then there's a sunflower, a dried sunflower.
The whole idea of a reliquary really conjured up for me that same feeling I had when I walked in the chapel, just that there was finally a place where these kind of truths, like very uncomfortable, socially awkward, absolutely necessary truths, can be held. So, yeah, it felt like a place that can hold more stories than just my own pain and sadness. I hope when people see Lanecia's work and they hear people have conversations with each other about, the limits of our humanity, that we just feel it as like fresh air. We feel it as a little more oxygen in the room in this sort of fetid, claustrophobic culture of toxic positivity. I think there will be beauty and meaning and hope for us all, but there's just really not going to be a solvable life. And I really hope that we can use each other to know that deep, deep down, that really is okay.